What's going on, guys? My name is Arrow, and in today's video we are going to be talking about my Stormbrand Sanctum map boss blaster. Stay tuned. So why Stormbrand? Number one, it's great for the Sanctum. So Stormbrand is a brand. Brands have a totem-like playstyle where you put them on the ground or on top of an enemy, and then they reach out with targeted projectile-like chains and do damage to enemies all around where the brand is placed. This allows for a safe Sanctum playstyle where you can drop your brand and move around and avoid damage manually, as you have to in Sanctums, and get all your damage out. Another reason I wanted to go for a brand is because I knew you could get really big attachment range, which means you can put it down on the ground and the radius is far enough where it'll just reach out and find an enemy. So as you're going through the Sanctum, you put down brands in front of you and then they reach out off screen and will freeze the enemy. The freeze is the second reason why I chose Stormbrand. With 2 Call of the Brotherhood rings, we are almost entirely converting our lightning damage into cold damage. If you have a big enough hit, you can freeze the guards. Now, Stormbrand casts over and over again, so each hit will freeze the guard long enough to wait until the next hit comes in, and all of the guards in the Sanctum are permanently frozen. It's an incredibly safe playstyle. I made this so I could try to do a no-hit run, which I have not done yet because I am too scared to try to use my scroll, but I will be doing it at some point. Reason number 3, fun. I love brands. I have not played a brand skill in a long time, and Storm Brand is one of my all-time favorite skills. So I thought, okay, how can I make this fun in 3.20? The answer was freeze. So let's take this opportunity to talk a little bit about the freeze mechanics. So I've done a lot of testing, and it seems to be the case that about 500k damage in POB per hit is going to freeze the guards. Now, this number is not exact. Maybe there's some guards that have less ailment effect on them, things like that I don't know about, but it seems to be the case that 500k damage will freeze the guards. So with that said, if you get freeze duration, it will lower the amount of damage that you need to do. So maybe you get the 60% freeze duration cold mastery on the tree, then maybe you only need to do like 400k damage. So that number can be tweaked with, but what I found was if you get to 500k, you can permanently freeze the guards. So I made a Stormbrand POB trying to get to 500k, and it actually was not that difficult. So the build that I have currently is very malleable. I built it for Sanctums, but you can make it do a lot of different things. It's a very good boss killer as is, but it's very squishy as is, because I dropped all of my defensive auras for offensive auras to make it faster to just kill the bosses, to kill Sanctum bosses, and to kill Sanctum guards. If you want to make changes to this, we'll talk about later how you can make this a better mapper and maybe even get more damage, but I do not have a lot invested into this character. I would say maybe 15 divines. Because this build is so malleable, as I talk about the gear pieces and the skill gems and I go through the tree, I'm going to talk about other options that you could do. For example, we use 2 void batteries. You could use a +1 power charge implicit synthesize shield. That's going to change the character of the build a little bit. It's going to be a little bit more defensive. It may allow you to have easier access to things like spell suppression if you want it, or going for larger block at the cost of a little bit of damage. There's a lot of options like that in this build, so if you want to make this build your own, it is very easy to do so. So let's dive in. Okay, so here we have our level 95 assassin. Stormy Brandules is the name. This character is currently designed to be a boss killer and a Sanctum farmer and a speedy Sanctum creator. So we've been running a strategy over the last few days where we essentially are trying to get in and out of maps really quickly. We're not boss rushing, but we are getting in and out of maps quickly. We are generating a lot of delirium orbs and things like that, and just trying to get as many Sanctums as possible. We did a bunch of Sanctums on this character. We got a bunch of divines and had a really, really good time. So let's talk about the gear. We are currently using 2 void batteries. The reason I decided to go for 2 void batteries is simply because it is the most damage that you can get. There are other options. I would say getting a +1 power charge shield is a much better all-around option if you are looking to be a little bit tankier, say in maps, or maybe if you're looking to really push this and do something like Ubers. Actually also has a higher ceiling for damage if you spend a lot of currency. Now you can get a +1 energy shield, and you can get spell damage on it, you can get cold damage on it, you can get +1 to lightning gems on it. There are actually a lot of offensive options, but it tends to get very expensive to craft a shield like that. So the budget option for pure damage is 2 void batteries. The helmet, we went for a Blizzard Crown because that adds a bunch of base damage. This helmet gets confused easily. I think people believe that the cold damage is doing more for their build than it generally is. I don't recommend going this base unless you're also using that flat cold damage for something like Herald of Ice, because it really doesn't add that much damage for you, and it does add a lot of cost. If you want to get the enchant that you want and the influences that you want, it's going to cost a lot more than getting a regular helmet. And I think maybe on this build it's like 2.5% more damage because of the cold resist that it adds. But we go for Herald of Ice on this build, and this helps with the shatters, so we like this helmet. We went for a mana reservation efficiency enchant because the Stormbrand stuff is kind of whatever as far as enchants go. This allows us to get 1 more aura in. And then as far as the explicits go, you've got a few options here. I actually made 2 helmets that were +1 power charge and nearby enemies have -9 to cold. And both of them were so bad on the Awakener that I just sold them. And I decided I wanted to try something different. So I tried a +1 power charge with a tier 1 lightning damage to spells roll, which is also very strong. And it turned out just okay. I used a Veiled Chaos to craft the suffixes, and I didn't hit the things that I wanted to hit, but I did get trigger socketed spells, which I intended to craft originally. So I just took that, it gave me a little bit of dex, and I just finished the helmet because I wanted to be done. This was episode 3 of making a helmet. You don't need to spend that much on a helmet. +1 power and -9 cold. If you get an open suffix, you craft the trigger socketed spells. We'll get into that in a minute. And you're good to go. Very, very strong. +1 power charge is so strong on a build that uses Badge of the Brotherhood. Speaking of, we also use Badge of the Brotherhood. This gives us a lot of things that are very desirable to us. Number one, the most obvious, it makes our frenzy charges match our number of power charges. You still have to generate them, which we'll get to, but the maximum amount that you can get is equal to your max power charges. I think we're at 9 or 10 on this build, which means we have 9 or 10 frenzy charges. Frenzy charges give you more damage, and they give you cast speed, which makes our brand cast faster, more damage. Another thing this gives us is increased effective elusive, and because we are an assassin, we always have elusive up, and we get a lot of benefit from that elusive, and we avoid damage, and also, most importantly for this build, we get a lot of movement speed. For Sanctum rushing and in the Sanctum, movement speed is king. Damage and move speed are the two things that you want in Sanctums, and we get a lot of both of those things on this build. And then lastly, we also get the benefit of the increased cooldown recovery of travel skills. So we use Flame Dash, which normally can be kind of annoying when you use it a lot, because it'll go on cooldown and you'll have to wait a couple seconds for a charge to come back. With Badge of the Brotherhood, we get 100% increased cooldown recovery rate because we have 10 frenzies, which means it's essentially halving our rate of gaining charges on our Flame Dash. So our Flame Dash is almost always available when we need it, no matter how much we spam it. So very, very comfy, especially in the Sanctum when you Flame Dash a lot. Next, we have the Call of the Brotherhood rings. These are absolutely mandatory. It allows us to do enough cold damage to keep everything permanently frozen. Stormbrand is strong without these, but it does not have the freeze effect that was desired in this build. This also allows us to do shattering while we're in maps with Herald of Ice. Make sure that if you get Call of Brotherhood rings for this build, you put the elemental damage modifiers on them to get your lightning damage conversion up to 48%. So we have 96% conversion. These boots are nothing special. They are simply just me solving a few problems. I got some movement speed, I got strength and res. Now they're really good stats, they're good numbers, but we're not doing anything interesting here. We're just solving res and stats. The gloves, we got cold damage leached as life. It's the only source of cold damage leech that we have at the moment. There are other ways to get it. Doriani's on a jewel, a large cluster, but we decided to solve it here. You can also get it on a relic. Relics are really, really strong for this build. There's a lot of interesting ways to solve problems. The one that I have has damage taken is recouped as life because we're petrified blood. That's really strong. And also brand attachment range. I just got lucky and dropped this while I was playing this build. So that's the one we're using. Oh, TB. Hey, buddy. So the gloves, we also get Unnerve on hit, which is something like 10% more damage. And then very similarly to the boots, our affixes are stats, res, and life. Nothing too exciting there. Next, we have this belt. So this belt was something that I crafted myself, spamming essences, and I hit tier 1 chaos, tier 1 lightning, tier 5 fire, and tier 1 life. Very, very cool. It had 2 open prefixes, and I was wearing it. And then one of my viewers said, hey, why don't you slam a Hunter Exalted Orb on there? I don't know, it was maybe like a 150C or something. I was like, sure, that sounds fun. It was a 1 in 6 chance to hit tier 1 life, and we hit it. So this belt is, I don't know, I think somebody offered me like 50 divines for it. You obviously do not need a belt like this. I played this build for most of the time without the percent life, and then this is just like a 1 divine belt. But again, crafted myself. Just make a Stygian. Stygians are so easy to craft. Make one yourself and save yourself a lot of money. The jewel, nothing too interesting, just avoid being ignited and some strength because we needed that. Lastly, we'll talk about this chest. Now, this is another place where you have a few options. I went for the Badge of the Brotherhood setup, so I'm getting frenzy charges on hit from my chest. If you go badge, you have to get frenzy charge generation on hit, not on kill, or else you won't have it on bosses. So we went for elevated spell crit, frenzy charge on hit, and additional curse. Very easy to craft one of these yourself. You basically get spell crit and frenzy charge on hit. You awakener's orb them together. I made a trash one. I got stun and block recovery, and then I locked the suffixes and I reforged caster to guarantee +1 curse, and I crafted on life. This is a very, very basic chest, super easy to craft, and cost me a couple divines total. We went for the Saintly Chainmail because it was decent armor and ES. If you don't want to go this route, if you don't want to go badge, you can actually go for a different setup where you use something else as your amulet. You could use ashes or a +2 amulet. There's a lot of things you can use there. And then you wouldn't have to generate frenzy charges. You could go for Inner Conviction, which is from a timeless jewel that gives you 3% more damage per power charge. And that opens up the chest slot for lots of other things. You could put maybe a Carcass Jack in there, a +2, +3, or +4 chest to get a lot more damage. There's a ton of options. Make this your own. This does not need to be made exactly how I made it, particularly if you don't want to feel a little bit squishy sometimes in maps. If you are, stacking up those altars, things can get pretty tough, and this build definitely is not a giga tank. Let's talk about the flask real quick. So we actually don't use a life flask, and we'll get into that in a bit, because we don't need one. So we have a sulfur flask, which is just kind of a filler. It's not great, it's just okay. Consecrated ground is a little bit more life regen. We recover a ton of life per second, and this just helps us get a little bit more. Armor with an armor suffix, just to make us a little tankier. We have Jade with a curse effect suffix to make curses hurt us less. Cast speed, very important, and then we have evasion and onslaught. So with all of our flasks up, we only have about 3,000, 4,000 armor and evasion, but it does do enough against the small hits where while you're mapping, things are mostly frozen, but there's sometimes when things aren't frozen, they hit you and you're fine. I'm just realizing right now that my cold res is at 31% because I moved this belt to another character to try something out and I swapped my lightning res. So normally I was res capped, but when I swapped that back, I forgot to change the res back. So ignore that. Let's review the gems. In our wand, we have Bone Chill and Divergent Arcane Surge linked to Vortex. So we have pretty great Arcane Surge uptime at level 14. You see up here that it will recast itself when I am just walking around and vortexing. In the helmet, we have Elemental Weakness and Frostbite, dual curse setup linked to Life Tap support and Frost Bomb. So we don't have to actually manually cast these. Because of the trigger socketed spells when you focus craft that we have on the helmet here, we just keep a focus button here. And then when we want to cast, they'll cast both of our curses and our Frost Bomb, which is super, super high quality of life. And then it's 12 seconds before we get it back, and our curses last that long anyway. So it's actually quite nice quality of life. In our other wand, we have cast when damage taken into Mortal Call. It's just the easiest cast when damage taken defense that we can get because we don't have a lot of armor for Molten Shell. We use a Flame Dash. In our gloves is our aura setup. We have a level 3 Enlighten, which is pretty cheap. Wrath, Hatred, and Petrified Blood. I added Wrath, and I recently took out Determination. I die a tiny bit more in the juicy maps, but honestly, for the most part, when I'm blasting, things just die, and I don't die very often. But you can make this as tanky or as squishy as you want, depending on your playstyle. In our boots, we have our Herald of Ice and Vitality setup linked to an Arrogance support because we are Petrified Blood. We keep the Vitality at 16 to make sure that we are reserving slightly less than half of our life. And then we have a Brand Recall here, which when you cast your brands, it will pull them all back to you, which can be really nice while mapping. Lastly, in our chest, we have our 6 link. We use Awakened Cold Pen for cold exposure. We have Inspiration, Power Charge on crit because we have a lot of power charges. Awakened Added Lightning gives us +1. Increased critical damage because we have a 100% chance to crit, so 150 multi is just really nice. And then lastly, a level 21 Store Brand, which is a fairly cheap item. And on the tree, let's start with the Assassin Ascendancy. So the obvious, we take the +1 power charge and we take the power charge scaling stuff. These are no-brainers on just about every assassin. If you're playing assassin, these 4 nodes right here are why you're taking it. Then after that, you have some choices usually. We are going for Mistwalker for all of the bonuses that we get from Elusive. Again, avoiding damage and a ton of move speed. And we have it full uptime because we get Elusive every time we crit, which is all the time. A huge bonus from Mistwalker that I think is often overlooked is take no extra damage from crits while Elusive. Not ever getting crit makes a build that is normally fairly squishy not feel that bad. If you can't get crit, the spiky damage gets leveled out a ton. Lastly, we take Opportunistic. So it's not full uptime on 100% chance to crit. Sometimes we're not getting 100% chance to crit. So if that's the case, you can die in reflect maps, so I don't actually run them. But the reason that we take this is when there's one rare or unique enemy nearby, which is a lot of time while you're in the Sanctum, 25% more damage, which is huge. And then this next line, which I think is another really underrated part of Assassin, which everybody says is so squishy, 20% reduced damage taken while there are 2 rare or unique enemies nearby, which is very often when you're juicing up maps. That's Fortify. You have Fortify while there are 2 rare or unique enemies nearby. Between that and no extra damage from crits, I really don't think Assassin is as squishy as people make it out to be. It's a great Ascendancy, very underrated. Let's talk about the rest of the tree. We take multi where we can. We grab Elemental Focus for more effective non-damaging ailments. I actually don't need this anymore. I took this when I was lower damage to make sure that I was perma-freezing, but you could actually drop this for more damage at this point. I may change that in the POB before I release this video. We take the Caster Mastery. The cast speed in multi is nice here. It's not insane damage, it's nice. The reason we take it is spells cause you to gain mana equal to their upfront cost every 5th time you pay it, which effectively means you spend 20% less mana, which is really, really strong. It allows you to really spam because your Vortex is going off all the time, spam your Stormbrand and not have to worry about it. Come over here, we take more multi to make sure that we're at 100%, we get this crit chance. The Power Charge Stacking Wheel, obviously. We grab a couple of brand wheels. We do not take this one because it just simply isn't worth it. We capped our crit, so we actually are getting, these are dead nodes. And we take 2 brand masteries. 40% increased attachment range in the Sanctum means you're getting way more effective uptime of your brand damage, because as guards spawn in, if you have, let's say, all 5 of your brands out and they're kind of scattered, a guard's gonna spawn in and instantly be frozen before he can move. So attachment range on this build is very, very strong. And then over here, we take Runesmith, very strong as well. And we take brands attached to a new enemy each time they activate, no more than once every 0.3 seconds. This allows the brands to kind of bop around and make sure that things are frozen. We take Stormweaver because we're scaling cold and lightning damage, so this is actually pretty good damage for us. And this way we can also leech our energy shield pool, which is not huge. It's only 670 at the moment, but it's nice to have another form of recovery. The more ES you have, the more effective this leech becomes. And then of course the multi, and we have a large cluster setup here, which we'll talk about. So Snowstorm, very strong. Lightning is extra cold against chills enemies. All of the enemies that we hit are chilled because we do cold. And because we're base lightning damage, this is really a nice amount of added damage. Disorienting Display, this blinds enemies nearby when you use an elemental skill, and we are using skills all the time. Brand Recall, Vortex, and Stormbrand are being cast constantly. So this 10% chance becomes pretty much 100% chance when you're bossing or killing guards. Because we scale evasion a little bit, blind is going to add to the effectiveness of that. You can also get Doriani's here if you want to skip out on the blind, and then you can drop the leech on gloves and get something else there. For our medium clusters, we are using Storm Rider and Inspired Oppression on the first one here. Storm Rider is just a bunch of damage. We're shocking and chilling at all times, so this is always uptime. Inspired Oppression is on both of our mediums because this solves our mana problem. It can be pretty expensive to cast Vortex on left click all the time and spam your Storm Brands, but because we are freezing and shocking at all times, we get 60% mana regen from both of these nodes. So that's 120% mana regen. That makes it so mana is not even a little bit of a problem for us. And then it obviously gives some damage as well, and effective non-damaging ailments, so our shocks are a little bit bigger. I don't know what size our shocks actually are. It's not something I've really paid attention to, but we are always shocking. And then over here, I got Blast Freeze. This is another thing that you could get on the gloves, but I got it here. And that allows your freezes to spread. So when you freeze an enemy with your Stormbrand while you're mapping, it'll freeze all the enemies around it. Very, very nice quality of life and great defense. And then it's just kind of whatever you want on a lot of these jewels. Get Corrupted Blood. We got a little bit of mana reservation efficiency to make our mana pool a little bigger, and it feels nice. It's not mandatory, but it feels nice. We solved some attribute issues here. This build does have a little bit of a problem with attributes because we need to get pretty high strength and dexterity. Petrified Blood is 155 strength requirement, which is pretty annoying. Over here we have another jewel that just has some life, some res, and that's about it on it. So not a big deal. This one is life phasing on kill, which is super nice, but nothing crazy here from the jewels. Let's talk about why we don't need a life flask. Gain 28 life per enemy hit while affected by vitality. Now, while you're mapping, you can have 5 brands out, and each brand is casting a bunch of times per second. And then each time it casts, if there are other enemies around, it will chain to those enemies. So while mapping, you are effectively getting thousands of life back per second while your storm brands are hitting packs. Also, you can drop them and move around and it'll continue to generate life for you. On top of the fact that we have a decent bit of life regen and life leech, this life per enemy hit effectively means if we don't get one shot, we can't die. So the crit reduction from Assassin, the generic damage reduction from Assassin when there's 2 enemies nearby, alongside of absurd life recovery between gain on hit, leech, and regen, and Petrified Blood making some part of our damage come back as a damage over time effect. We are very, very, very tanky for a build that doesn't really have any defenses. We don't really scale armor evasion at all. We don't have spell suppression. We don't have block, and it feels okay to map with. Now, if you wanted to do like juiced maps, I would definitely do something different. I would probably go for like a +2 impulses and then get shock prolif on our gloves. And then mapping is going to feel incredible. And it actually wouldn't be that much of a damage reduction. You'd go for the, like I explained earlier, the inner conviction tech and drop the badge of the Brotherhood. And you would probably have more damage and better clear. I just wanted to go this route. This build is far from optimized. It's not perfect and it's malleable, which means there are so many cool things that you can still do to this build to make it stronger, more effective. And as you already saw, it's really, really good. It kills bosses fast, it can map, and it crushes the Sanctum. So I highly, highly encourage you to make this build your own. Feel free to come ask me questions either down in the comments below or over at my Twitch, twitch.tv/AER0__. I will happily answer questions there, and so will my chat. So that's going to be it from me. I appreciate you all so much. Thank you for watching. I hope you play this build. If you do, let me know. And as always, take care.